The transportation and logistics industry has its own set of challenges. In the hot seat, industry thought leaders take on M&A and what's driving the future of transportation and logistics. Are you ready for the hot seat?
Welcome to In the Hot Seat with the Tenney Group. I'm Spencer Tenney. It's good to be with you. Coming up today, I'm very excited. We have a special guest that is laser focused on the reindustrialization and the future of commerce. With me, I have co-founder and managing partner of Dynamo Ventures, Santosh Sankar. Santosh, welcome to the Hot Seat.
Thank you, Spencer. It's great to be here. And I know I've been a bit of a pain in the butt to get pinned down, but glad we're able to spend this hour together.
I think it's going to be well worth the wait, sir. So before we heat things up a little bit, why don't you just take 20, 30 seconds and just give a little backdrop of the work that you're doing there at Dynamo.
Yeah, absolutely. So my team and I at Dynamo Ventures, we've been around for nearly a decade now. And we spend our lives exclusively finding this next generation of relentless founder that is going to rethink and redefine how we think about reindustrialization and the future of commerce. And what that practically boils down to, Spencer, is we then put that into one of three categories. And those tend to be around how we make, move, and monetize goods. And perhaps a differentiated muscle that we've developed over the years, and really since our inception, is we don't just look at the landscape here in the U.S. or North America to invest in. We actually invest globally. And so we're able to actually identify various trends or themes and find the right people to partner with to really realize that, depending on where they are in the world. And you'll find that some subject matter is more opportune for investment elsewhere outside of the U.S. than within the U.S. And a lot of that has to do with technology, maturity of operations, as well as overall industries. But over the years, we've had the good fortune of being early investors, more often than not the first check investor in companies such as Store down in Atlanta, that's powering commerce and fulfillment for most of the high growth brands here in the U.S. that you or I might subscribe to, or our family members might subscribe to. Gatic AI out in the Bay Area that's really carved out a pole position in middle mile logistics using their autonomous vehicles. And then a bit of flavor from across the Atlantic. We were an early investor, and I believe, if I'm correct, the only American investor at the seed stage in Sender, who has now consolidated the digital freight brokerage market over in Europe and is just pushing on scale year over year. So kudos and credit to all these people. We would not be here if it were not for them and their teams.
And I believe that's just a flavor of what's going on. And we're going to unpack some of the other things that you've got cooking because there's quite a bit. So let me start with this. So we connected through my friend Ted Alling, your partner. And Ted was on Freight Caviar here just the last couple of days talking about the genesis of Dynamo Ventures. So I'd love to get your take. What how did it come together? Because this is very unique in the venture capital world. So tell us a little bit about the genesis.
So I think the one thing we probably don't talk about enough as the group of partners at Dynamo and really kind of founders is that everybody spent meaningful time with varying degrees of success, Spencer, founding and trying to build and create product and companies. My journey started when I was 13, and I was being probably a bit of a snotty-nosed teenager, asking my parents for all these bright, shiny objects that I saw my friends getting. And my dad kind of just turned around and looked, and he goes, "This is just not happening, son. We moved to this country about 10 years ago. We're still kind of finding our way. And so if you would like to acquire these bright, shiny objects, you need to figure out how to make money." And he had pointed out that at about the age of 6, he taught me how to program a computer. And I'll never forget, we're kind of in the basement. It was raining. It was super vivid in my head. And my dad had just bought his first personal computer. And I just remember him like saying ahead of that purchase how he's kind of saving away, because these used to be $2,000-$3,000, right, in order to put in our homes. And when he bought that, my sister was also recently born, so he was responsible for keeping me entertained and occupied. And being the pain in the butt I was, he eventually said, listen, I'm going to show you that you can teach a computer how to do things. And he taught me how to write a program that would help him do his expenses every week. And that thread got pulled up till the age of 13, and I got deeper and deeper into technology. And my dad pointed out, there might be people out there who will pay you for these skills that I've taught you over nights and weekends. And that ended up being correct. From about the age of 13 till about when I graduated high school, I ended up selling to small businesses in my hometown up in Columbia, Maryland, effectively IT support and the early days of what it looked like to be live and have a presence on the internet. This was pre-cloud. You used to have a server in your back room. Odds are you had an IT administrator on site. I did all of that. And business was good enough that I could then train some of my friends in order to do this work, because it was ultimately all about manpower and man hours, right? Being a professional service. Went off to college. In college, I studied finance and information systems. And I had this inkling that, hey, like I'd seen how technology had changed the world, but I wasn't quite sure what that ultimately meant. But at the end of my sophomore year, I convinced a few of my friends to start our next company, which was a media business devoted to the financial markets. This business was only created to help us get on Wall Street. We had gone through kind of the indoctrination at our university that our successful alumni end up on Wall Street. You want to get on Wall Street. And so as a means to stand out, because we were also just around the Great Recession, we ended up standing up this business to say, not only are we going to talk to you during the interview, we're going to show you how amazing and awesome we are. And so you could probably pick up the thread that I like to use technology in business to own my own destiny from time to time and have the sense of greater control. That's not always true. But as I pulled that, I spent about 5 years in New York thinking I wanted to start a hedge fund. And I realized, and part of my realization came when I was introduced to Ted, who I'm forever grateful for, is, hey, like my North Star is actually highly entrepreneurial. And hopefully everybody could see that. At the age of 13, I kind of got the bug and have not really been able to shake it off. But when I teamed up with Ted Berry, there's actually a third co-founder whose name is John Bradford. And John and I day to day run Dynamo. Most founders who probably run into me and spend time with me probably also end up spending meaningful time with John. But John pointed out when he spent time here in Chattanooga, hey, there's a vein of competency in this part of the world. And at that point, the words that were used were, I think, transportation and logistics. That's just a piece of the broader reindustrialization stack and what we call movement today. And John's point was, I've seen financial services at the end of the Great Recession and financial crisis emerge as hubs for financial technology. And you can think of New York, London, Hong Kong as being these epicenters. San Francisco's always a player, given that's where a lot of new novel technologies and business models are oftentimes founded, right? They kind of have that ecosystem stronghold around technology. But when you apply it, it unlocks all these other ecosystems. And so together, while I call Chattanooga home with Ted and Barry, it's really the Southeast, and increasingly, I think what's been obvious over the last 12 to 18 months, Spencer, is it's the Midwest. It's actually reinvigorating what people might call parts of the Rust Belt or overlooked geos. This is where wealth was originally created, if you think about the first industrial revolution in the U.S. And we're in this, I believe, once-in-a-generation lifetime, a once-in-a-generation moment in our lifetimes where you're seeing a reindustrialization. The difference being is we're asking questions around how digital automation intersects with the world of iron, metal, and steel. And that's ultimately what we're focused on and investing in. Granted, there's also then a load of opportunity when you think about how we're going to be purchasing or driving commerce, both as consumers as well as business operators.
I love how you kind of frame that, part of what you're doing and, what's kind of guiding the investing strategy is the asking of questions. And it clearly, if you look at the portfolio of companies that you've invested in, you've asked some pretty big questions and some pretty imaginative questions. And I'm excited to unpack that a little bit more. So let me kind of transition to this, because I think that where our worlds kind of intersect in the M&A world is, we deal with some of the most experienced investors across the globe that are in the supply chain. It takes a special investor to do what you're doing, which in some cases, you're talking about pre-seed, seed, and according, to our conversations in your website, these are, sometimes pre-product and pre-team. And that is very difficult for a lot of investors to kind of get their mind around. Can you walk us through what that looks like, where you kind of take how do you get from that point to having a portfolio company that is, perhaps in Latin America or in Europe, and now you guys are solving problems? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually, a few weeks ago, was catching up with a friend who's a COO of a large publicly traded logistics business. And we're talking about kind of a variety of things, but he made this interesting comment as to, in the industry, we look in, Santosh, and there's a bit of this mystic around kind of you and Dynamo. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe over the years you want to kind of address that kind of alchemy orientation. And I've really sat with it over the last 2 weeks. And maybe I have not connected the dots intentionally enough. But first and foremost, let me say, it is very hard to take an idea and a concept and over the course of a decade have the fortitude in order to realize that into $1 billion plus company. And again, we've had the good fortune of having several of those in a very short period of time that were either the first check or one of the first checks. But what's ultimately the center of that, and trying to cut through kind of the mysticism, is we think about people and the team. And for a lot of people, it kind of is like, what? Like, but you talk about industry. Well, regardless of what industry you're at, regardless of the stage and maturity of your company, what do great business leaders always talk about? They talk about things like people, it's hard to find good help, culture eats strategy for breakfast. These are all kind of known philosophies. And the way we incorporate this, or rather internalize it and operationalize it, Spencer, is you'll oftentimes hear us remind each other that 80% of a decision always boils down to the quality of the team. And it may not always be a team. It's at least a single individual. And as an investment firm, over the years, we have come to peace, perhaps, or rather identified and been increasingly more honest that we are a CEO's investor. And what I mean by that is we are ultimately, at the end of the day, equally a technology investor as much as we are a industry-oriented investor with this special focus. And so many people might say, but what do you do for the technical leader inside of the startup? And we've always kind of grappled with, like, what does that mean? How do we support them? And a few years ago, we started throwing our hands up and saying, we cannot be everything to everybody. That's how we actually built our reputation the first 3 years. We did not try to be everything to everybody. And as you kind of get success and things get bigger, you might face the allure of that. But we kind of reel that back and say the CEO is what's important to us. If there's support for the CTO, we will find a co-investor, or we'll mobilize individuals from our network to provide advice and be a mentor to those leaders inside the business. And so it comes down to people. And what we found, Spencer, is great people can manage and parse through anything that a market might provide it. Great founders will navigate poor markets to a state of success. Whereas less strongly constituted teams might squander away the best market opportunity given to them. It always comes down to people. And we now, having done this for a decade, equally have the scars we wear that demonstrate that.
100%. So I want to, like, to me, like what you're saying, some people are like, this isn't, there's nothing like about what you're saying that's very original. What's interesting about is the application of what you're doing. So people are like, of course, you bet on people based on a known context for what they're going to be doing, but that's not what you're doing. You guys are getting into frontiers that nobody knows anything about it. I mean, they have not been done yet. And so I'm going to read off some of these things. I mean, you've got LogRock, AI native agency for tracking insurance. Bonks is ERP for mid-market manufacturers. Freight Hero, human-centric AI for freight brokers. Lux, is it Eterna? Is that how you say it?
Lux Eterna, yeah.
This is my favorite. Reusable satellite buses for scalable space economy. I'm like, what in the world? And so to me, like, number one, do you just bet on things that are cool? Is that what's going on here?
You know what? You and I might be the only people who think an ERP is cool. But you'll find as an early stage investor, right? Let's kind of step away from the people part, because that can be subjective, but we can come back to it as to kind of some of the things.
Go ahead.
We look for that might be differentiated from, the $1 billion company that's publicly traded and the types of people they look for. But the privilege that I have is that I get to think about the future and use data and anecdotes as I go through my life to formulate an opinion on, hey, there's certain problems that exist today. There's certain opportunities that present themselves. If I fast forward, what do those look like in a decade? And then when I think about present day, what does that mean today for me to capture those opportunities and realize them in that fashion in a decade? The thing, though, to be mindful of, and as an investor, one could sit with a lot of confidence, let's call it arrogance, right? And overconfidence that their worldview is the right worldview. No. What we do is we show up with what we call a prepared mind. And so at any given point, there's at least one individual parsing or revisiting some subject matter in our industry scope and talking to prospective buyers, partners, people who have succeeded historically, people who have failed historically, in order to help us come up with a worldview as to, is this something we want to spend time in? And if we do, what might be some of the key ingredients to the success of the product, the sales organization, and the overall business? And in this day and age, there are also kind of aspects around regulatory landscape, macro, in order to make this vision a very real vision that over time could return our funds, but result in a business that is industry defining and is probably worth $1 billion or more. And so it takes a bit of imagination, right? And it may not be attractive or in vogue, but the reality is you need to be able to step out of the known boxes and environments that you exist in. And there's the classic innovator's dilemma. It's very hard once you're indoctrinated in a way of doing something to believe there are better and more original ways of operating, right? Yeah. And so that's what we end up doing, but it's constantly informed by the market. And there's certain areas that we do the work and we go, hey, this probably isn't for us. It might be for our cousins in private equity. There might equally be areas where I go, yeah, you know what? That's interesting, but it might be a timing issue. It might be a technology capability and capacity issue. It's not for us. And there'll be a few things that we go, this is for us.
Yeah.
And
I want to back up 1 second. You mentioned something about a prepared mind. Like, can you elaborate on that a little bit? Because I think that's interesting. What do you mean by that?
If you are a founder who has pitched Dynamo, very seldom have you had to explain the problem and the market opportunity to us. Because odds are we've turned over a lot of rocks and we can talk through some of the minutia, for example, around aircraft maintenance operations we've been able to experience some of the challenges with what it means to integrate a modern ERP against a legacy stack of technologies. In the case of Freight Hero, we've been able to really understand and many a times have to operationalize a lot of the load operations that Freight Hero is trying to address using their human-in-the-loop AI. You never really need to explain these things. Part of that has to do with having a prepared mind, going deep in a subject area and staying relevant and on top of whatever the latest and greatest is within that subject area. And granted, over time, we might retire certain things. Either that opportunity has been realized by us or someone else, or maybe we realize, hey, this isn't something for us. We don't necessarily have an advantage. Yeah. And one of the things we do incorporate when we make an investment is we ask ourselves a true question as to how can we help, right? There's plenty of capital out there. If all a founder wants is capital, we'll usually say, we're not your guys, gals. If you want a true partner and somebody who will go from your idea to that point where you're demonstrating readiness to scale, we might be a good partner for you. And part of that is showing up with a prepared mind where we have opinions on your product, how you build GTM, the types of people you need to hire, how you achieve that $2.5–3 million mark that the market currently says is a demonstration of a readiness to scale. But equally, it's access to customers. It's access to pools of talent. And that might be very different, pools of talent, company to company. That's depending on the tenure of the CEO, how experienced they are in hiring, whether that's a natural capability of theirs. But usually every company of ours will take us up on that. And we might be giving you or introducing you to prospects, or we might be sitting within the process you've predefined as a player on your team to help you identify the difference between great and good.
I love that. So earlier this year, you guys announced the closing of your third fund, a $54 million raise, which congratulations on that, sir.
Thank you.
Part of the headline was that it was a 4x return on for some of your initial investors. So that had to be rewarding and validating for you guys over the last decade. But kind of going back to the founders, I'm interested in what you have learned over the last 10 years of investing in a variety of different companies. What is predictive about the people that you're investing in that translates to future success?
So this is something over the last several years we've revisited, and at this point we've done it so much that I think it's just kind of this annual tradition. We have, if not a semi-annual tradition, and some of the things that we picked up along the way, right? Some of the things that are constant, that are predictive to success as a startup founder. And I, again, want to remind people, when we say startup founder, this is somebody who has a vision of the world that probably most people cannot even fathom and or agree with as a result, but they believe it for a variety of experiences that they have had firsthand. And so one of the key things that we look for is what we call relentlessness. Where in their life, it doesn't only have to be in a professional setting, right? What was their upbringing? What were the types of activities they did as they were growing up? What are their hobbies? Where do they demonstrate relentlessness? And we'll walk through, hey, tell me about yourself, right? It's probably the most open-ended question. But it's one of those questions, because it's open-ended, can give you such a deep insight into an individual. And from that, we will look to identify different things. So relentless being one. There's also something that goes on with or goes alongside relentlessness around kind of aggression, or what we might call equally fast muscle twitch inside the colloquial language of Dynamo. But we found like these two items, they're very hard to just teach or develop for an individual showing up at our door. I'll put a third there around self-awareness, right? But these are three of roughly 7 things that we look for when we look at a founding team. But these are the things that have been most evident to us over the last decade that generally map to success. Think about relentlessness, right? Business is hard. you're going to more often than not wake up in the mornings, as our friend Ryan Peterson says, and you're going to be chewing glass. And you're probably going to be chewing glass for days. And you might have one win and you're back to chewing glass. It takes a special breed to be able to get up, get hit in the face, and keep going. Aggression. How are you going to convince your first, let's say, 3 to 5 customers that you, maybe a company that is 1 to 3 people, should be given a shot and they should pay in some way, shape, or form for the product or service you are offering? It takes a bit of relentlessness to find those early believers, right? I can't teach that. There's nothing I can do. I can open any door in the world that you probably want, but I cannot ultimately go close for you or on your behalf. Self-awareness. How are you going to ultimately, over time, identify where your weaknesses and strengths are? Spend more time with your strengths, right? We call that spend time in your zone of genius. Understand how to, over time, hire and delegate away your weaknesses. That might still be critical to the success of your business. More often than not, it is. But that's where you develop the skill to hold people to account. And one of the things over the years that we've tried to articulate using various adjectives. Charismatic. Don't really love that because charlatans are charismatic. Con men are charismatic, right? We now think about the ability to persuade and or having a magnetic capability. That then goes hand in hand with, are you a clear communicator? Why is that important? Again, we're the CEO's founder, or sorry, we're the CEO's investor. And so you need to be able to convince investors to give you capital. You need to convince lenders to give you balance sheet. You need to convince customers that they should buy your product. You have to then, most importantly, convince talent that your vision and your culture is worth joining and making missionaries out of them, right? It takes a special breed. But these are some of the ingredients as to what it takes to really go on the journey and be able to have an attempt at building a generational business.
You know, it's funny. My wife and I, we were just talking, and we've got young kids, and our oldest, Hudson, is almost 15, and he's kind of shy. But we talk about like, hey, he's got lots of gifts, but we're like, hey, son, like clearly communicating and being able to persuade, like that's the only thing that kind of takes whatever current limitations that you have. Like that's what that makes everything effectively limitless at that point. So you like, we just know that we have to help him develop these skills. And like to your point about like the founders, you can be relentless, but if you can't persuade, it's very hard to get somewhere, you know? So I appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense. And who are the best people at, the most convincing people are the people that are super passionate, that understand. It's the CEOs, that they're the folks that often are the best salespeople for themselves. If they can sell their own idea, sky's the limit.
And we'll frequently tell even our founders who are probably much more wise than us, having, grown businesses that are approaching billions of dollars in revenue. You're always going to be the best salesperson for the business. That'll never go away as long as you're the CEO of the company or involved full time in the business. So really use that. But some of the conversation we've equally had over the last year is all of these traits that we look for. It's not about everybody scoring high or kind of checking the box. It's not that. It's an understanding and an appreciation of the person and the team that we're working with, sitting in front of, and identifying where they spike or where are they strong. And for example, oftentimes people who are aggressive may not be as strong in self-awareness, but that's because they are so aggressive and they can kind of not think about maybe the aspect of, am I coming off as overly aggressive or annoying? Am I a pest? Because they may not kind of hold or spike around self-awareness. They might have elements of it. But that's where it's important to then say, okay, how do they respond to coaching? That's another attribute we have. And you'll oftentimes hear VCs talk about coachability. And over the years, I myself, for the better part of 10 years, have used the word coachability, but I'm now addressing this more as like bendability. I don't want a person who just takes my advice or takes my partner's advice at face value. There are times where you would like that. I'd much rather have somebody who goes, I'm going to listen. I'm going to go away, digest. I'm going to come back with you as to kind of where I got, incorporating all of this advice. And sometimes I'm going to incorporate it. Other times I'm going to throw it out, but this is why. Because you know what? Ultimately, they know better. They're day to day in this business, in this industry, in front of customers, managing their people. But what we can do is help them understand where others have succeeded and failed, helping them look around corners, helping them think more strategically at a high level. And great businesses ultimately are built by people who, again, might have a bit of stubbornness in their vision. And so if they're just to simply bend and not have a spine, that's equally not that attractive, so to speak, for us.
That makes a lot of sense. I want to talk about the future, the next decade. But before I move on, I imagine that you working with these CEOs, I mean, does it ever feel like that they offer somewhat of a mirror for yourself, like working with these founders? I'm curious, what have you learned about yourself, Santosh, is working and investing in these founders over the last 10 years?
When we started Dynamo, I did not appreciate the value of the founder and the founder archetypes as much as I do today, quite bluntly. And it's something that has rubbed off on me, in part, having the privilege of working with my partners, as well as some other great investors that I've had the chance to share boardrooms with and investments with. But I think the thing that I ultimately draw is I know my zone, and I probably have a more deeper understanding that I get a lot of energy, and the data might suggest that I'm pretty good at helping people navigate the 0 to 1 that we call in venture, right? Getting from an idea to something that's scalable, has revenues, operations that can grow with incrementally more capital. But equally, the types of people that I enjoy working with. And you know what? There are probably a lot of difficult personalities that I don't think twice, that I love enjoying. I love and enjoy spending time with, because we have a mutual understanding of one another and how we cooperate, communicate, and execute. And that's not for everybody else. And it is a bit of a mirror, because there are times, Spencer, right, where something that is very real in venture is most of the things we invest in don't work. They just don't work. They go to 0.
Yep.
And so it might be logical that from time to time we kind of look at ourselves in the literal mirror and say, do I even know what I'm doing? And when you then spend time with founders who have just found their stride, or might be a decade in, and you help fund that vision and help form that vision and get them on that track, there's a reminder as to, this is a tough game, but you might have something there. So there's always that inspiration and that reality coming back from these people. And I didn't quite appreciate that.
I think that's great wisdom. I think that, we talk about this a lot with our clients, just about, if you're going to, just being a part of the supply chain, it's a fascinating industry to be a part of, but it's also incredibly unforgiving. And just like what you're talking about, just because there's you're not going to bat 1,000 at it, in business, in investing, and especially in venture. I mean, it's by definition, you're not going to bat 1,000.
Yep.
And so to me, I hope what our audience hears from that maturity, that growth on your side, is that no one bats 1,000 in life in any context, but you kind of chalk it up as what did I learn? And it doesn't change my value and what I'm doing. So anyways, I hope they hear the wisdom in that, because I think that will be a great encouragement to a lot of folks. So let's start talking about the future here. Recently, you led Dynamo's seed investment in Orion Geo, an AI native platform powering global security operations centers for blue chip manufacturers, data centers, and critical infrastructure. Um, why are you excited about it, and why is this significant?
So, Orion is one. When I was speaking to Colin at Axios, who broke the news, the one question Colin asked me is, how does this fit into your landscape? He goes, this feels like a security thing.
Yeah.
Is that kind of within your remit? And I pointed out to Colin, right? If we step back and consider some of the mega trends or forces that we all need to grapple with, geopolitical conflict, right? Several years in the making. Trade war, we had the shadow of it last year. We're now thrust in the middle of it, speaking to in late 2025. And there's now an increased consciousness around, are my assets safe? Are my people safe? Are my operations secure? Are they liable to disruption? And when you look at what is a value chain, right? What is industry or commerce? It's a series of assets that are driven by people who drive process and use technology in order to bring it all together or drive it in this era of AI. And it's taken me 36 minutes to utter the word AI, I think. So kudos to us.
Applause.
But what Orion effectively does, right, is they have, in one example, a very large household name that we all know in consumer electronics that is using Orion to secure all of their manufacturing facilities, monitor their supplier manufacturing facilities, and intermediate operations, effectively the transport that brings raw materials and work in progress for final finishing. And they view the world as to all these assets, these people, these operations are under threat. How do we monitor them? How can we proactively identify risk and disseminate the right protocol to address these risks before they're realized? Sometimes they're never realized. Great for us, but we're ready. The current status quo pre-Orion Spencers, this is all reactionary, right? This is what we call GSOC, or Global Security Operations Control subject matter. And every large business has one of these. They're usually tracking executives where they go, ensuring they're secure. Without our knowing, as employees, they're probably also making sure we're secure and the facilities in which we live or rather work in are secure. And so for us, it was kind of very obvious to us that this opportunity with Orion, it's an opportune time and it's cross-industry. Mm-hmm. And it's something that's only going to be further exacerbated because let me continue to lean on that example. When you're a manufacturer, the vectors of risk that you monitor are very different than if you are, for example, an entertainment venue, right? And so for the manufacturer, one of the things that they monitor is electricity fluctuation in the grid, because that could result in work stoppage, at which point you might have in that organization hundreds of millions of dollars a day that are at peril. And so this is very critical for them to get on top of, especially with the way the macro is shaking up.
Making, moving, and monetizing goods, sir. That seems pretty dialed in to me. It's amazing how big, when we talk about, like what you're doing in the venture capital space, specific to the supply chain. I think some folks kind of, just fail to understand how big it is across a global landscape and the problems that you're solving. I just was teasing you about the variety pack in terms of the portfolios. It seems that there's a lot of diversity in terms of the things that you guys are taking on. What's next? What has got you excited with your team? What can you tell us?
So if we were to step back, and there are two things that I would say we probably look at, depending on who you are at Dynamo, daily, weekly, at least. And those two things are birth rates, especially in the US. And then the second thing that's emerged over the last, let's call it 12 to 18 months, is this inherent demand for compute driven by AI, But really, if you're to kind of get to the essence of it, it's around data centers and electricity. So that demand, you could distill it down for the demand for electricity. And so as we look ahead to the new year, it's increasingly thinking about, as we look at kind of reindustrialization itself, we have this big, bold vision. It is a bipartisan vision that there are critical industries that preserve our sovereignty and national security around things like chips, batteries, pharmaceutical product, defense and composite materials. These are competencies that once upon a time, the manufacturing competency sat within the U.S. And globalization took hold, and rightfully so, right? And kind of the invisible hand said, hey, we need to remember that we specialize, and specialization of these competencies should exist elsewhere in a lower cost environment. But it didn't account for sovereignty issues. And so as we lean into that against declining birth rates, immigration slowing down, but you have this relentless need for electricity driven by compute requirements, you're going to see us probably spend more time around what does the future of data center construction look like? It's this precipice. We have LPs who are calling us and saying, we have demand as specialty construction firms that lay down electric and telecom infrastructure for the next 30 years. We don't have enough people coming through that we can train fast enough to be able to realize this. We have folks on the construction side, or the construction logistics side, saying there is such a high stake now to us failing to deliver materials on time, or for us failing to progress the job site as per requirement, that we could lose tens of millions of dollars a month doing this. And by the way, maybe more importantly, we lose our reputation, at which point we're just shut for business. And so there's this forcing function for us to rethink how things are made. That's one thing. The next thing is there's this buzzword, and I hate this word, but I'll say it. It's called physical AI. All physical AI means is robotics and autonomy. We've invested in this. Actually, the very first investment Dynamo made was a company in autonomous trucking called Starsky Robotics. It's no longer around. And so we've been doing this for about a decade, right? We've kind of seen cycles up and down. But what's interesting and exciting to us is on one side, you have a demand for these facilities need to be operational. They need to have this much throughput and output overall in terms of widget, whatever you want to call your widget, a chip, a piece of composite material, pharmaceuticals, whatever it is. But again, we don't have people. We don't have people who could do these jobs. The Midwest and the Southeast have the highest density of existing trained and qualified labor for manufacturing. There are going to be some tasks that, frankly, for the foreseeable future, I don't believe can be automated away. And so humans are going to be a key ingredient. But there are equally probably just as many, if not twice as many, operations within a plant that can be automated away. What do those robots look like? How are they deployed? How are they implemented? That's going to be another area you're going to see us spend more time in. And digging in there, I'll give you a third because I love 3s and 5s. You'll find that's a quirk of mine, I think it's going to shock a lot of people who are not familiar with industrial operations that a lot of manufacturing sites and even warehouses operate on technology that was pioneered as far back as the 60s, right? We call this OT, or operational technology. Operational technology has two components. What you call PLC, think of it as an industrial computer. And then it has what you call OT networks, or operational technology networks. These have been around for the most part since the 60s. It is not as easy as you or I in our business environment implementing a new piece of technology, like a new laptop, and we just sign on and it's seamless to us, right? These are entrenched into operations, and depending on the scale of operations, they could have GDP implications if these operations stop functioning even in a given day, let alone a week. But there's another opportunity here as to what does the modern industrial computer look like? What does the modern industrial network look like? We take for granted sitting in white collar roles that we have this to our benefit. But if we're going to realize the reindustrialization promise and the shape and the future of commerce as Americans, but also as global citizens, some of these things need to change. And under them are massive markets that are completely untapped because they're really, really hard to solve.
And that's where you come in. I love it.
Give me a call.
The reindustrialization of promise. Now that's a phrase that I hope gets some traction here. All right, I got one last question for you. This has been phenomenal, by the way, Santosh. I mean, such a good conversation, and I appreciate that.
Thank you.
We were talking offline before we rolled tape here about the much needed break you and your team are going to take in the next couple of weeks. My question is this: what does Santosh listen to get recharged, to get re-energized, to relax? What are you going to be listening to the last 2 weeks of 2025 to either relax, get ready for all that's coming in 2025? Music-wise. I'm not talking about podcasts. I don't want to hear about that.
No.
I want something that's making you move.
So, people are definitely going to laugh. I'm going to get friends who reach out and are like, this is hilarious. I love Christmas. I think Christmas is one of the best times of year. We listen, I'm not somebody who listens to Christmas music starting in July. I have a high school friend who definitely does that. But week of Thanksgiving, you'll hear Christmas music wherever you're going with me. But apart from that, I love classic rock. I love country music. That's usually what you'll hear me listen to if I'm driving anywhere, if I'm sitting here doing some deep work. Big fan of the Stones, Dire Straits, big George Strait guy.
George Strait.
Big Zach Brown.
Come on.
Big Zach Brown band fan. So I think that's probably going to elicit a whole lot of reactions, probably mostly laughs. But odds are, once we've kind of gone through Christmas, we're going to kind of get back on to kind of the mainstream routine listening along those veins.
I love it. Hey, that's going to do it for us in the hot seat, Santosh. We will see you next time.